Hi, I'm Schmauderer.
And I'm Jake McNamara.
I'm a junior here at PBA studying business administration with a minor in economics.
And I'm also a junior here at Palm Beach Atlantic, and I'm majoring in business management.
Alright, so the case that we're presenting today is the Torcaso v. Watkins case. This case took place in the 1960s and serves as a landmark case concerning religious freedom and the rights of individuals to be free from declaration of religious beliefs for public office. This case addresses whether a state could require individuals to declare a belief in the existence of God in order to hold public office. This is an issue that concerns not only the First Amendment's protections of religious freedom, but also the relationship between church and state.
So for parties involved, the plaintiff in this case was Roy Torcaso, who was a professed atheist and was appointed by the governor of Maryland to the position of notary public. As a part of the official process, one of the requirements for holding this office was to declare a belief in the existence of God. As mandated by the Maryland state constitution, due to his personal beliefs and commitment to the principle of religious freedom, Torcaso refused to fulfill this requirement. His refusal led to the denial of his commission, which he viewed as a violation of his constitutional rights. Believing that the religious tests imposed by the state infringed upon the freedoms guaranteed by the First and 14th Amendment, Torcaso initiated legal action against the state.
And for the other party involved, the defendant in this case was Perry Watkins. He's the Secretary of State of Maryland, and he is responsible for issuing commissions to public officials. Watkins denied Torcaso's commission on the grounds that Torcaso refused to make the required declaration of a belief in God as mandated by the Maryland Constitution. By enforcing this religious test, Watkins became the central figure in the legal challenge, representing the state's position that belief in God was mandatory for holding public office.
So in the circuit court and previous courts, Torcaso, feeling that his First and 14th Amendment rights were violated by this requirement, he filed a lawsuit against the Secretary of State of Maryland, Perry Watkins, in the Maryland Circuit Court. The Circuit Court ended up ruling against Torcaso, ultimately rejecting his U.S. constitutional argument that his First and 14th Amendment rights were not violated due to this requirement. The Circuit Court of Maryland upheld that the requirements to declare a belief in the existence of God to hold a position of public office was valid under the Maryland State Constitution.
So, Torcaso, feeling frustrated with the Maryland Circuit Court's ruling, he appealed the decision to the Maryland Court of Appeals. However, the Maryland Court of Appeals upheld the lower court's judgment, reinforcing the idea that the declaration of religious belief in the existence of God was mandatory for holding public office under the Maryland State Constitution. This decision further deepened Torcaso's resolve, as it showed the conflict between state-imposed religious requirements and the constitutional protections of individual freedoms. Convinced that his rights were being violated, Torcaso took his case to the U.S. Supreme Court and requested an appeal to the Supreme Court in a last-chance effort seeking a definitive ruling on the constitutionality of religious tests for the public office. The Supreme Court considered and accepted Torcaso's case.
So basic facts and summary of everything so far. In Maryland, under Article 37 of the Maryland Declaration of Rights, requires that a person must declare a belief in God in order to hold a public office position. Because Torcaso was appointed by the Maryland governor to a position of notary public, this meant he had to declare a belief in the existence of God. Because Torcaso refused to do this, Watkins denied him commission to serve as notary public. Torcaso then filed a lawsuit in the Maryland Circuit Court claiming that the state's profession of faith violated his First and 14th Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution. Torcaso then appealed to the Maryland Court of Appeals, and they ruled with the lower courts. Torcaso, still frustrated and feeling that his personal rights were violated, appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court tried the case and accepted it in 1961.
Legal issues of this case. So the core legal issue in the Torcaso v. Watkins case is whether Maryland's requirement for a belief in God to hold public office in Maryland violates the First Amendment's protection of religious freedom, which the 14th Amendment makes apply to state laws. This includes the Free Exercise Clause, which guarantees individuals the right to practice their religion without government interference, and the Establishment Clause, which prevents the government from imposing any specific religion. The Supreme Court needs to decide whether this state-imposed religious declaration interfered with Torcaso's right to freedom of belief, which is protected by the First Amendment, and if it violated the U.S. Constitution's prohibition on religious tests for office holders.
So the Supreme Court's ruling was after 3 months. In a unanimous decision, the Supreme Court ruled that Maryland's religious tests for public office did in fact violate Torcaso's First and 14th Amendment rights. The court held that Maryland state law infringed upon Torcaso's right to religious freedom and was therefore unconstitutional. Emphasizing the fundamental principle that the separation of church and state, the court made it clear that no government, federal, state, or local, can compel an individual to profess a belief in any religion as a condition for holding a public office position. This decision reaffirmed that religious liberty includes the right to not believe, and the government cannot favor belief over non-belief.
Our opinion, from a law perspective and from a religious perspective, we agree with the Supreme Court's decision because it upholds the principle of religious freedom, which is a fundamental right under the U.S. Constitution. As Christians, we do not believe that under the law, a person must profess a faith in the existence of God to be able to work a certain job, non-religious of course. We believe this to be extremely discriminatory, and the United States is a country filled with many diverse backgrounds and ethnicities. Due to this, religious freedom should be protected. It's important to remember that religious freedom means freedom for everyone, whether they believe in God, follow a different faith, or choose not to believe at all. Forcing someone to declare a belief just to qualify for a job goes against the values of fairness and equality that the Constitution is meant to protect. Protecting religious freedom helps ensure that everyone, no matter their background, can fully participate in society without fear of being treated unfairly.
So as we were reading about this case, we started seeing similarities in a previous case that we had earlier discussed in class. The similar case that we were thinking about was Mutual Pharmaceuticals Company versus Bartlett, which involved the Supremacy Clause. This case was about how the state and federal laws required a different amount of side effects to be labeled on a prescribed medication. We thought these cases were similar because in the Torcaso v. Watkins case, the federal law in Maryland required there to be a declaration of belief in God for any state office position, and this conflicted with the U.S. Constitution. So we thought that it was interesting that both of these cases dealt with conflicting state and federal laws.
In conclusion, Torcaso v. Watkins was an important case that made it clear that the government cannot require people to say they believe in God to hold public office. This decision was important because it protected the rights of individuals to serve in government without having to pass religious tests based on their personal beliefs. This case reminds us that the Constitution is there to protect our freedoms, especially the freedom to believe what we want without government interfering. This ruling is a powerful reminder that everyone deserves equal treatment regardless of their faith or lack of it. Cases like this ensure that the Constitution continues to protect personal freedoms in an increasingly diverse society. Yeah, so some of our final thoughts for this case are the reason why we chose it and thought it was really interesting is because it was one of the cases I read about where it started off in the circuit court and then was appealed to the Court of Appeals, and then it went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court and was accepted. And I thought it was interesting because in the Circuit Court and the Court of Appeals, both judges ruled against Torcaso, but at the U.S. Supreme Court level, the judges actually ruled in Torcaso's favor, which I thought that was really interesting, how the first two courts didn't want to rule with him, but in the Supreme Court, their findings led them to want to rule in his favor.
And from a religious perspective, I just thought it was interesting how an atheist belief is no belief, and so I never really thought going against someone's belief could happen if someone was an atheist, but it does kind of make sense how their belief is that there is no God, and so that is technically going against their belief, and I just thought that was also an interesting part about this case. And thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.